What if the most advanced cold-weather survival system ever built had no steel, no insulation, no batteries, no engineering at all, only wood, hide, and a single living flame? Picture the storm first. The blizzard does not arrive politely. It comes across the open plains like something alive, dragging walls of ice through the air, each frozen splinter sharp enough to sting bare skin in seconds. The cold here is not an inconvenience, it is an attacker. It invades. It turns every breath into a cloud, and every careless movement into a gamble you might not win. And out here, the modern world quietly begins to surrender. Batteries die without warning. Fabrics stiffen until they crack. The horizon dissolves into a white void where distance and direction simply cease to exist. For most people, survival in this place is not a plan, it is a countdown measured in hours, sometimes less. And yet, long before synthetic insulation or engineered gear, entire families slept through nights like this, not once, but for hundreds of winters, across countless generations. Not behind walls of concrete or steel, but inside something that, from a distance, looks almost impossibly fragile. A single cone of poles and hide, standing alone against a force that should erase it. It seems exposed, defenseless, a whisper of a shelter against a screaming world. But that first impression is a lie, and the closer you look, the faster it falls apart. Because somewhere inside this quiet structure is a detail so simple, so easy to overlook, that even now it surprises the people who finally understand it. And here is the strange part. It is not the part you would ever expect. Hold on to that question, because while the storm howls outside, a child sleeps warm at the center of it, and the reason why is about to change everything you think survival means. So look closer, and the fragility begins to vanish. The teepee is not weak, it is shaped. That cone is not decoration. It is a quiet act of engineering. When the wind crashes into a flat wall, the wall absorbs the blow and waits to fail. But the teepee gives the wind nowhere to push. The curved surface lifts the gusts upward and slides them around, scattering the force before it can ever gather into something dangerous. Snow behaves the same way. It cannot cling to a slope this steep, so it surrenders and slides off, instead of piling into crushing weight. And the wind doesn't slam against the hide so much as wash over it, losing its strength a little more with every pass. The real genius, though, is hidden in the bones of the structure. It begins with 3 poles locked together into a tripod, a stable heart, and from that core more poles are layered in, each one leaning into the others, sharing the burden so that nothing ever stands alone. When the storm intensifies, the frame does the opposite of what you'd expect. It doesn't crack, it tightens, pulling the pressure inward and turning the assault into stability. Many of the poles are even tilted slightly into the prevailing wind, so impact becomes balance. And that is the first real secret of survival out here. Not resistance, but alignment. Now here is the part most people never learn. These shelters were not the work of warriors among the Plains nations. The Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Blackfoot, the teepees were designed, built, and owned by the women, raised or struck in a matter of minutes, and dragged to the next camp on a wooden travois. This was portable architecture, a home you could fold up and carry across 1,000 miles of grass. And almost always, the doorway faced east, turned toward the rising sun, so the first warm light of morning would spill across the floor. Survival and meaning, woven into the same frame. But even the most perfect structure is only a shell, and a shell alone could never keep a child warm through a night like this. The answer begins at the very center, with fire, but not the wild, roaring kind you might imagine. This flame is small, deliberate, almost tame, and the pit that holds it is often dug slightly below the level of the floor and ringed with stones. Those stones are doing something quietly brilliant. They drink in the heat while the fire burns, store it deep inside themselves, and then release it back into the room long after the flames have sunk into soft red embers. So the warmth doesn't leave when the fire calms. It lingers. And directly above that fire, the next system goes to work, the smoke flaps. From the outside, they look like nothing more than 2 simple openings at the peak, but they are precision instruments. Adjusted against the wind, they create a steady upward draft that pulls smoke out through the top, while drawing fresh, cool air in from below, and suddenly, the entire shelter begins to breathe. Warm air rises, Cool air feeds the flame. Smoke escapes instead of choking the room. No fans, no machines, no moving parts. Just physics understood so deeply that it runs on its own. It is, in every real sense, a natural ventilation engine, adjusting itself in real time to a storm that never stops shifting. But there is one more layer, and you would never see it from outside. Hung along the inner wall, set just a few inches away from the outer hide, is a liner, and in that narrow gap, a thin blanket of still air gets trapped. That trapped air becomes insulation. The heat from the fire slows down before it can escape. The cold pressing in from outside loses its momentum before it ever reaches the people inside. It is the exact same principle behind the double-paned windows and insulated walls of modern homes, achieved here with nothing but hide, woven cloth, and air. Layer by layer, the teepee stops being a tent and becomes a living thing that inhales and exhales around the fire at its heart. And yet all of this, every clever angle, every breath of air, would be worthless without one thing no structure can provide on its own, something a person had to spend a lifetime learning to master. That one thing was knowledge, but before we reach the fire, watch what happens to the snow. Out on the plains, snow is the enemy that buries everything, and yet here it becomes an ally. Packed carefully around the base of the teepee, it seals every low gap where a draft might crawl across the floor, sealing the seam between the warm world and the frozen one. The very thing trying to kill you is folded into the wall that keeps you alive. Inside, every inch is arranged with intention. Thick layers of fur hold body heat close to the ground where it matters most, and the circle itself pulls everyone inward, toward the center, so no one is ever left sitting against a cold edge. Food is kept along the outer rim where the air stays cool enough to preserve it, but never freezes it solid. Tools rest within arm's reach. Clothing is hung near the fire, to dry soft and flexible by morning. And the fire is never simply fed, it is read. Dense hardwoods are chosen for the long, slow heat that lasts through the night. Lighter wood is saved to wake the flame when it begins to fade. Even resin and fat are added not to make the fire bigger, but to make it smarter. At night the flames are banked low and covered in ash, so the embers survive quietly until dawn. None of this is instinct. It is knowledge, earned through failure and repeated until it became second nature. And this is the part that stays with you long after the storm. Gathered in that circle of light, the elders told stories while their hands stayed busy, and as they spoke, the knowledge moved from old hands to young ones, from one generation to the next. The fire was never only heat. It was memory, a living thread tying grandparents to grandchildren in the dark. Because this wisdom was never written in any book, it lived in hands that had been taught by other hands. And yet, even all of this, the snow, the fur, the fire, the stories still depended on choices made long before the first snowflake ever fell. Because survival here never began with the storm. It began long before the first snow ever touched the ground. A teepee was never raised by chance, it was placed behind a hill, a tree line, a fold in the land that could break the wind before it arrived. The ground was chosen slightly raised, so melting snow would drain away instead of pooling underneath, and the doorway was turned away from the prevailing gusts. Wood was gathered for days of confinement, hides were checked, bindings were tightened, everything set within reach, so that when the storm finally came, there was no scramble, no panic, only quiet, practiced motion. And that brings us back to the question left hanging at the very beginning, the one detail inside this shelter that still surprises the people who finally understand it. It was never the poles, or the fire, or the clever layers of air. It was something you cannot see at all. It was calm. Because in a place this unforgiving, fear, clouds, judgment, and panic burns the energy you cannot spare, and the most advanced survival technology these families ever carried was the stillness to think clearly while the world came apart around them. So they sat. They told stories. Their hands kept working. And the storm, still raging outside, slowly faded into the background of a life that simply continued. When it finally passed, the teepee was still standing, not shattered, not buried, not defeated, but quiet and unchanged, as if it had been part of the storm all along. And that is the truth most of us miss. It did not survive by fighting the wind. It survived because it understood it. In a world that tries to control everything, these people chose to understand instead, and maybe that is the oldest wisdom of all. If this changed the way you see survival, stay with us. Channel name, where we uncover the forgotten intelligence of the past.